Ladies and gentlemen, I could make a joke about how that forms an exhaustive list of everyone in attendance here tonight, but that would be too easy. I'm Seamus Callahan, and I serve as president of the Stanford College Republicans. It's been quite a ride bringing this event to you tonight. The Student Senate finally realized that trying to suppress free speech on campus isn't a wise idea, however tempted they might be to do so. That hasn't stopped our leftist friends from pulling out every trick in the book to try to stop us. As usual, they've been tearing down our flyers almost as fast as they go up. Almost. This year, they decided to escalate things by lighting our flyers on fire. One of them wrote an incendiary op-ed in the Stanford Daily saying they were going to take stopping this event into their own hands, which sounds like a threat if you ask me. And of course, Eventbrite, the ticketing platform we were using, decided to shadow ban our event at the last minute. All that panic. Over what? A man who thinks that if you're having an identity crisis, you might be better served by therapy than surgery? Or that we shouldn't abandon the basic safeguarding of children that we've always had? Now, I'm sure some midwit will come out during the Q&A saying, well, I have a peer-reviewed study, bro. And I'm sure you do, bro. I'm sure you do. If there's one thing my experience as a PhD has taught me, it's just how much BS gets published in major peer-reviewed journals when there isn't even a political or financial incentive to do so. But I digress. The left has done everything they can to stop us, and yet, here we stand. Because the truth is that which endures, and that makes the truth inevitable. Our speaker tonight is one of the great truth tellers of our time, and one of the foremost activists against gender ideology in our schools. He's the creator of the paradigmatic documentary on gender ideology, What is a Woman?, and the author of the best-selling LGBTQ children's book, Johnny the Walrus. Please give it up for the man who made woman the word of the year, Mr. Matt Walsh.
Well, it's great to be here at Stanford today for the continuation of my What is a Woman tour, which began last semester and now by popular demand is picked up again for the spring. And I've heard and would like to acknowledge, as we just heard in the introduction as well, that some of the students here on campus did not want me to be here. They've demanded that the event be shut down. They've claimed, in the words of one student writing for the student newspaper, that I'm a dangerous presence and that whatever it takes, quote unquote, I must not be platformed here. Of course, they say I'm a genocidal bigot, a threat to their safety, and they say lots of other things along those lines. To those students, I just want to state at the start that I am sorry that you think you can get your way through that kind of emotional manipulation. I scared you for a second, didn't I? I am sorry that you've been told that the world will always bend to your whims. You can't always get your way, and it doesn't always bend to your whims, at least not this time, not with me. Now, you know, a few years ago, when these kinds of crybaby college students would start kicking and screaming because someone they disagree with expressed a point of view that they don't like, I used to say, just like a lot of other conservatives would say, to these crybabies, oh, well, just you wait. You know, you're going to get out into the real world, and you're going to have a rude awakening, because in the real world, people aren't going to put up with this nonsense. You won't be able to get away with this in the real world with your temper tantrums. You'll see. Well, it was I who needed the rude awakening on that point. I've since realized that my faith in the real world was misplaced. As it turns out, the institutions that run the real world are very eager to continue coddling the self-centered delusions of full-grown adults. They have indeed created a society that is structured around that goal. if you wish to hide from reality and to live a self-centered existence, totally focused on your own desires and your own need for affirmation, the real world is more than happy to accommodate you. That's the reality. That's the kind of life that the powers that be want for you, which is exactly why you should not want it for yourself. But that only makes an event like this all the more urgently important, because the fact is, if you're unspeakably outraged by my presence and by the things that I say, I don't know how often, in school or in real world, you'll be forced to experience something uncomfortable like this, where someone simply says what needs to be said regardless of how you feel about it. I'm afraid for your sake and for society's sake that it won't happen that often for you, actually. And that's why we have to make this count. That's why it's so important for me to tell you, especially if nobody else will ever tell you again, that your tears cannot sway or silence all the time. I'm not concerned about your feelings, I'm concerned about the truth. And the truth that we're here to talk about tonight is this: that you are either a man or a woman. You do not get to choose which category you belong to. You don't get to switch from one category to another. Your category does not depend on your acceptance of it or your agreement with it. Your self-perception may conflict with your self-reality, but the former cannot change the latter. It is actually possible for a person to perceive themselves in a way that's wrong. Now, I might perceive myself to be Oprah, yet no matter how sincerely I perceive myself to be Oprah, no matter how upset I would be to find out that I am not Oprah, I still am not Oprah. I could change my name to be Oprah. I could wear a costume. Well, I couldn't do that because I'd get in trouble for that, but that's one costume you're still not allowed to wear. But the point is, no matter what I do, I can't be Oprah. I cannot be something that fundamentally contradicts the identity I was born with. I am stuck with that identity whether I like it or not. In fact, I had a self, right? That is, I was a person, I was a being, long before I developed any perceptions about myself. I was born as an infant with very little self-awareness, like anybody else, and yet I was still a self, a person with an identity. The self precedes self-perception, which means that the self cannot be fundamentally determined by self-perception, because your self came along before you had any self-perception. Our job is to bring our self-perception into line with the reality of ourselves. If the two are not in line with each other, then the perception must be changed to fit the physical reality, because you cannot change the physical reality to fit the perception. And so all this means that your sex is determined without your consent. It is a matter of nature. It is a matter of physical reality. And that physical reality will make you either male or female. There are no other categories. Those are the only two. Nobody can transcend this binary arrangement. Nobody can truly be trans. They can only see themselves as trans or claim that they are trans or say the word trans, but you can't actually be it. That's not a legitimate category of being. It doesn't exist. Nobody transcends it. We are all in the binary, whether we like it or not. This is what makes gender ideology, the belief that gender is fluid, that we can choose to identify as man or woman, that men can have babies and women can have penises. This is what makes this whole ideology insane and poisonous and destructive. It's also why I oppose it. I oppose it fundamentally because it isn't true, and I oppose all things that are not true, especially those things which eat away at the basic, essential realities of life. Now, what I'd like to do next, just as I've done in all of my talks on this tour, is briefly address it's 5 now, I've expanded it to 5 primary objections to everything that I've just said. The proponents of gender ideology have essentially 5 arguments. And I find it useful to acknowledge those arguments up front and just address them in detail ahead of time, so let's go through them. Objection 1, they say, well, you talk about sex and gender like they're the same thing, but they're not. Sex is biological, but gender is a person's understanding or feeling about themselves. Answer, no, I don't think that sex and gender are the same. It is you, the gender ideologue, who has essentially collapsed the very sex versus gender distinction that you engineered. There was a time, perhaps, when you would have agreed that there is at least a biological difference between a woman and a self-professed woman who is a male. But now you yourself have erased that difference. You insist that trans women are women. You insist that they're exactly the same in every way. You've even changed the definition of female in at least one major dictionary, now two, I believe, to include men. So you treat the terms woman and female as interchangeable. They are both now gender identities according to you. If you did still affirm a definitional distinction between sex and gender, then you would have to also affirm that there is in this world a binary category of male and female, and that those who belong to each group cannot cross between the two. But you won't affirm any binary at all or any substantive distinction at all between so-called trans women and actual women, which means that the whole sex versus gender thing was nothing but a sleight of hand trick. It was a bait and switch the whole time. Now, as for me, I have no use for the term gender in the first place, unless we're talking about the gender of words, masculine and feminine words, which is where this term originates. Because I see only men and women, males and females. Each individual in either group has a different way of being, a different way of expressing themselves. But we don't need the word gender to describe that. We already have a word for that. It's called personality. That's what you're talking about. Objection 2. They'll say, well, part of your definition of woman is that they can get pregnant, but what about women who can't get pregnant? Does the existence of infertile women not disprove the entire gender binary? Checkmate. Now, answer, I don't say that every woman in the world can get pregnant, obviously. Obviously, that's not true. What I say is that women are of the nature to get pregnant. A woman is a person who is of the nature to get pregnant. In other words, it is natural for a woman to get pregnant. If you are the sort of person who it would be natural for you to get pregnant, then you're a woman. It is something women can do and no one else can do. In a similar way, I might describe a human being by saying, among other things, that he is a creature who walks on two legs. Human beings are bipedal. Does that statement become invalid just because babies can't walk and some people don't even have legs? Does the existence of amputees and infants call into question the very notion that humans have two legs? If somebody asks you whether humans have two legs, do you have to equivocate on the answer? Are you not able to just say, well, yes, they're bipedal? Do you have to say, well, the number of legs is on a spectrum, you see? Let me tell you about the leg spectrum. The same with the sexes and their reproductive abilities. Age, disease, genetic defect, or other circumstance can preclude some females and some males from partaking in reproduction, but that does not at all, even slightly, call into question our understanding of the sexes or their definitions. Every female is of the nature to get pregnant. She is supposed to be able to get pregnant unless age precludes it or she suffers from some sort of ailment. But a woman who is of childbearing years, so let's say a woman who's 28 years old, and if she's unable to get pregnant, she tries to get pregnant and she can't, she'll go to the doctor and say, doctor, I can't get pregnant. And he'll be able to run some tests and take a look at things, and most of the time he'll be able to tell her, oh, well, this is the problem. Whether she can fix it or not, he can identify the problem, and he'll know that there is a problem because he knows that, oh, this is a woman and she can't get pregnant. Something's wrong here. This is what's known as the exception that proves the rule. Now, on the other hand, if I go to the doctor and say, doc, I can't get pregnant, he's not going to look to see if there's something wrong with my body. He's going to want to see if there's something wrong with my mind. Objection 3, they say trans people have existed throughout history all over the world. The binary is a Western construct, you see. Well, this is a very common rebuttal. It's also maybe the dumbest damned thing you'll ever hear. It's like saying that photosynthesis or gravity are Western constructs. No, on the contrary, it's the rejection of the binary that is a modern Western construct. Gender ideology was invented by people. We know who those people were. They were mostly old white guys in mid-20th century Western culture. They wrote books. They made arguments. They were pedophiles, most of them. Also not a coincidence. Everything the left says about gender, they have derived directly from a very small collection of degenerate perverts like John Money and Alfred Kinsey. These guys invented all of this. We can read the books and watch them inventing it. It is a construct. Now, the idea that men are male and women are female, the two categories are immutable and cannot be changed, that traces all the way back to the dawn of human civilization. Every single civilization in history has affirmed it. There has never been one until ours that has tried to claim anything but that. Nobody before us was stupid enough to believe that men could have babies. It took the most educated and technologically advanced civilization in history to come up with something that batshit crazy. Objection 4 is maybe my favorite. They say, well, why do you care so much in the first place? Can't you just leave people alone and let them be? Can't you leave them alone? My answer to that is, first of all, that's not a rebuttal to any argument. That's more of an intellectual surrender, if anything. The answer is that I care because the truth matters more than anything else in the world. It matters more than life itself. That's why I care. It's that simple. But also, why are you asking me why I care? I mean, you are the one who insists that we should care deeply about trans and LGBT issues. You throw parades announcing your sexuality and gender identity to the world. You have flags, and a lot of them. Okay? You can't put something on a flag and then ask me why I care about it. You can't throw a parade for something and then look at me and say, why do you care about this thing we're parading through the street, ranting about? No, you're throwing the parade in front of my face. I see it happening. I might have an opinion about it. I might say, well, I don't know how I feel about this. Why do you care so much, bigot? No. You want me to care. You demand that I care. You won't allow me to not care. It's just that you want me to care in the way you determine and arrive at the conclusions that you have pre-approved. You don't have a problem with the fact that I care. You have a problem with the conclusions that I have drawn. And you're too cowardly and shallow to debate the conclusions, so instead you pretend that you just want to mind your own business, even though you were 10 seconds ago dancing in the street in leather bondage gear, screaming about your lifestyle choices into a megaphone at a bunch of confused children. So don't give me that why do I care nonsense. Objection 5, and this is one that I've had to add. You're not qualified to make these statements. You're not a doctor. Who are you to be saying all this? Well, that's right, I'm not a doctor. I don't even have a college degree. I am a community college dropout, speaking here at Stanford. Can you? And you're applauding that. Good. I was a terrible student. I barely graduated high school. That's the honest truth of the matter. I have no credentials, except for best-selling LGBT children's author. I do have that credential. And I do have that framed in a plaque in my office at Daily Wire Studios. So what qualifies me to opine on this subject? Well, first of all, I'm defending basic self-evident truths. You don't need a PhD to understand basic truths. In fact, these days it seems like you need to not have a PhD to understand basic truths. Now, if I were up here saying that, you really shouldn't throw a bunch of puppies into a bag and then chuck the bag into a river. Now, what if I were to make that statement? I don't think anyone would challenge me and claim that I'm not qualified to say that because I'm not a veterinarian. Right? If I said that it's a bad idea, if you don't know how to swim, to jump into the ocean and try to go free diving, I don't think anyone would say, well, you can't make that recommendation. You're not a licensed lifeguard. There are some truths, both moral and scientific, that are accessible to everyone. In fact, most truths are. And all truths are, in fact. And the truth that men are male and women are female is one of the most accessible truths there is. Same for the truth that doctors shouldn't chemically castrate and butcher gender-confused children. No expertise is required to understand these concepts or to communicate them. But even so, you might further object and you might say, well, yeah, but why must it be you specifically? Why should you be up on the front lines of this fight? Well, fair enough. But the answer is because it has to be someone. Someone has to do it, right? Someone has to speak up. As it turns out, there aren't that many people who are very eager to stand up here and say all these things. So, I'll do it. That's why. But the point I want to make in closing is that I am not possessive of this ground. I invite anyone and everyone to speak up also. I will gladly move to the side and make room for anyone who wants to join in this fight against this madness. In fact, I ask you to join. I implore you. I would relinquish the spotlight gladly because I don't care about that. I care about the truth. That is what matters. And that's what we should all be defending. Thank you. That's all I got. Thank you.
'Cause the flag still stands for freedom, and they can't take that